campground was really nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, we've done a bunch. Everything was nicely spaced out, and everything they got every Wi-Fi and.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead, ladies and gentlemen, call the meeting to order. This is the City Council meeting, City of Moorhead, August 26th, 2019. It is approximately 5:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, may we please receive a roll call?
Shelley Dahlquist. Here. Sarah Watson-Curry.
Here.
Shelley Carlson.
Here.
Heidi Duran.
Here.
Joel Paulson. Here. Deb White. Here. Chuck Hendrickson.
Here.
Mayor Judd.
Here. And then if we can please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. And before we move forward with tonight's meeting, again, just giving a reminder that if people wish to address the council during the meeting, please fill out the yellow forms that are found outside the entryway. There's a desk out there that has a copy of these. Please, once you filled it out, bring it to Madam Clerk, and we will call you up when we get to your item. This is a reminder that this is for the agenda item, citizens addressing the council. And to note that this item is for citizens to address items that are not on the agenda. And then we'll move on to number 3 on the agenda, which is the agenda amendments. Are there any?
Mr. Mayor, there's no agenda amendments today.
Okay. Then we'll move on to item number 4, the consent agenda. And again, all items listed with an asterisk are items that will be placed on the consent agenda unless there's any motion to bring anything out. Do we have such motion? Any motions? All right, motion made to approve the consent agenda is made by Councilmember Duran. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Carlson. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Did I miss anything? Okay, just wasn't sure. All right, moving on. It's been a couple weeks, so I might be a little rusty. All right, so we'll move on to number 5. Recognitions and presentations, Moorhead Library Budget Update with Ms. Liz Lynch and Ms. Megan Kruger.
Hello, Mayor Judd and members of the council. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today to talk to you about the Lake Agassiz Regional Library, the Moorhead Public Library, and also our budget requests for 2020. The Lake Agassiz Regional Library System provides public library service in 22 communities in a 7-county service area. And the Moorhead Public Library is by far our largest location, and we also serve the greatest population at the Moorhead Public Library. The employees of the Moorhead Public Library, including the director, Megan Krieger, and they're just always looking for ways to work with the Lake Agassiz Regional Library to determine the best way to meet the needs of the community of Moorhead. The Moorhead Public Library and all libraries are so much more than just a place to check out books. We all know this. The Moorhead Public Library is in the business of connecting people with the resources they need to succeed. We provide notary services, educational programming to literally library or community members from ages birth through 100 plus. We provide computer instruction, referral services, free meeting room space, and much more. But with all of this going on, I still think it's worth it to mention the books in the library. It's still our bread and butter. And so to date, the Moorhead Public Library has checked out over 125,000 items this year to Moorhead residents and individuals who use the Moorhead Public Library. And by the end of this year, we're projecting that Moorhead Library customers will download approximately 55,000 ebooks and e-audiobooks by the end of this year. So I think that those numbers are fantastic, and also I love that Moorhead is a community of readers. Regarding funding for Lake Agassiz Regional Library, we are primarily funded by our cities and counties, and this includes 5 cities, including Moorhead, of course, and 7 counties. And we also receive some funding from the state of Minnesota through the Department of Education. And the money that comes from the state of Minnesota comes in for 3 different purposes. The first one is a line item called Regional Library Basic System Support, or RLBSS. And RLBSS is funding that we receive from the state of Minnesota for the regional system to share resources. And this pot of money, we received 1 increase in 20 years from the state of Minnesota. So we will be going back to the legislature in 2021 to ask for more funding for regional public library systems. And then another source of funding that we receive is called Regional Library Telecom Aid, and that's funding that we receive for our internet services across the state. And then the third pot of money that we receive from the state of Minnesota is called Legacy funding, and that is tied to the Legacy Amendment. And we've been receiving that funding since the Legacy Amendment passed in 2008. And this funding that we receive from the Legacy Amendment can only be used for, it cannot be used for operating, it can only be used for providing programs at our 22 locations. I did include our Legacy Fall Series brochure, and I really encourage you to come to the Moorhead Public Library to view one of our Legacy programs this fall. This funding for our legacy programming is so important. It's really about improving the lives of rural Minnesota. These are free programs, and they really give our residents something to look forward to. And these programs have been so popular at the Moorhead Public Library that last year we actually had to remove stacks of shelving to accommodate all the people who are attending these programs. It's not uncommon to have over 100 individuals come to these programs. Regarding the operating budget for 2020, all of you should have a copy of that as well. So we received money from the state of Minnesota, but we also received the money from our signatories, or our 7 counties and 5 cities. And as you'll see, the Lake Agassiz Regional Library Board decided to ask our signatories as a whole for a 3% increase this year. Last year, we asked for a 1.5% increase, so this is a higher amount for this year. But the reason why we're asking for a 3% increase versus a 1.5% is because last August, we found out that our health insurance rates were going to go up 22%. We hadn't seen health insurance increase in a number of years, and we knew it would be coming eventually, but we just had no idea that we'd be hit with an additional $61,000 for our health insurance costs. And so that's why we're asking for the 3% rather than the 1.5% this year. Do any of you have any questions about the budget request or about Lake Agassiz or the Moorhead Public Library?
Any council members have any questions? Councilmember Watson Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Liz, for the great presentation. Curious if you guys have had staff changes as far as like how many people you employ at the Moorhead branch, if that's changed with the, like when the last time that's changed or been modified at all?
We had had the same amount of staff for like forever. I don't know how long, but for I would say like 20, 30 years, something like that. And then I don't know when it was, a few years ago, we had some staff cuts. And so we've only gone down in staffing rather than going up.
So you're speaking of I know you recovered some of the weekday hours as
Yep.
far as in the morning and the evenings, but Sundays have still not returned, but you're still operating at a deficit of staff even though you
Oh,
recouped
yeah.
those 2 hours? Okay,
Yep.
thanks for that info.
And I had a question real
Yeah.
quick, just a clarification. What was your second funding source?
We receive funding primarily, 72% of our funding comes from our signatories, the cities and counties, and then the other funding source is the state of Minnesota.
Okay, so what I got was the line item, and then your signatories, and then the legacy funding.
From the state of Minnesota, we receive the internet funding, some operating support, and legacy support. And so for operating, it's just signatory and regional library basic system support, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Yep, I
Okay.
just want to make sure I got my notes caught up. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember White?
First, I wanted to comment, just thank you for your presentation, and I know a few of us were able to visit last, in the spring, and it was wonderful just to be able to learn more about all of the work that we're doing regionally and in our Moorhead Library, and I just appreciate just how much that you're doing with limited resources. And so, and I know that we've had to make cuts like losing Sunday hours and things like that. So I do appreciate that. And I wanted to ask a question because it came up in a committee meeting, in our Human Rights Commission meeting the other day. Someone was asking about bookmobiles. And I think I know the answer given limited resources, but is that something that we have ever done, or have we considered doing that to do some outreach into different neighborhoods to help kids get access to books?
Well, we used to have a bookmobile, and it was discontinued in 2004. It was a sad day. And so we haven't had one since then, but I think the concept of bookmobiles has changed so much. You don't need a giant semi or Winnebago-ish, gas guzzling vehicle anymore. And so we are kind of working on a plan to maybe try to do some fundraising to try to get a smaller version of a bookmobile that could travel around the city.
Great, thanks.
So, Councilmember Carlson?
Thank you for the presentation. Just to kind of a little bit respond and just correct me if I'm wrong, you guys do a lot of programming in the summers that you bring books to kids into the parks, and then also you have implemented some different types of kind of bookmobile-ish type book exchange with this Meals on Wheels, and I think, was there one more too?
Well, we have the Summer Parks program where we go to the summer lunch sites and Meals on Wheels. And, well, we call it pop-up libraries, where we travel around to like the farmer's market or different events that are going on around the city and register people for library cards and talk about our services.
So still developing ways to be innovative without the necessity of actual vehicle that you have to maintain and gas up and all of that.
But it sure would be nice.
Yeah.
Does that bring up any further questions for Ms. Lynch or any comments? Councilmember Watson Curry?
One last question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You talked about the increase, you're requesting this increase from your signatories. Are you presenting this to the other counties and
Yep.
city commissions as well? Okay.
Yep.
All right. I assumed so, but wanted to
And
make sure.
in case any of you are curious, the way that when we say we're asking for a 3% increase or a 1.5% increase, it doesn't mean that we're going to go to every signatory and say 3%, 3%, 3%. We actually ask for an overall 3% increase, and then we apply a formula based on 80%, where 80% is based on where the borrower within the city limits or without the city limits. 10% is based on population, and 10% is based on population and then property value. So when you look at that, you'll see, you know, that Moorhead is paying more for services because of where the borrowers reside.
Madam City Manager.
Thanks, Liz. I was going to ask that, if you could explain how that split is. And I don't think 3% is unreasonable. You've got salary and benefits, et cetera. As I mentioned to you guys, we have a really tight budget this year, so it's not, I'm glad to see that it's not higher than 3%, so thank you for that. But the council will be taking that up in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And the preliminary budget will be discussed at the first council meeting in September overall.
Great.
Just to let you know.
Sounds good. And if I may, I just also wanted to mention that we had just received this handout from the Department of Education regarding library services in Minnesota. And so I'll let you take a look at that on your own, but just as a reminder, in Minnesota, all counties are members of regional library systems. So Lake Agassiz Regional Library is just one of 12 library systems. There are about 355 public libraries in Minnesota. 7 out of 10 Minnesotans have library cards, which is awesome. And also on the back, I thought you might be interested to see where operating revenues come from, because it is broken down by cities, counties, state, other, and federal.
Does that bring up any additional questions for Ms. Lynch? Okay. Thank you again for all your work and for the presentation.
Yep, thank you for all your support.
Thank you. Ms. Kruger, were you going to speak, or is that the? Oh, no. Okay. Thank you. It had both names, so I just want to make sure I wasn't excluding anybody, so. Okay, we'll move on to number 6 on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from the August 12th, 2019 minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Councilmember White to approve the minutes of the August 12th, 2019 meeting. I'll give the second because you're sitting closer, or, okay, well, okay, sharing is caring. Councilmember Dahlquist, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Citizens addressing the council, item number 7. And so I do have this evening 2 requests to speak forms. And again, just to give everyone a heads up, you'll have 3 minutes to make your statements to council. And again, I'll leave it up to my colleagues. However, this is probably not the time for a question and answer session, but if council wishes to make any comments or has any brief questions, we can allow that. Just want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time, and also that we're moving along in our agenda. So first, I have a Ms. Heather Keeler. And the third, okay. And then, Ms. Keeler, if you could please just state your full name and then state your address for the record, and then you can begin.
Heather Keeler, 1905 19th Street South in Moorhead. So I just wanted to come back and tell you guys all how much I appreciate your votes for Indigenous Peoples Day. It's not only really important to me, but as we move forward in the planning, it's really important to this community. And one of the main questions that you guys asked was like, what are we gonna plan on doing? And so I just wanted to come and give a really quick, as I watch the time, update, because it's set for October 14th. We do have the downstairs reserved from 9 to 9:30 here. We're gonna have a smudging and a drum group, and then I know that we've tried to put it on your calendar, and anybody else who can come. Fargo is also coming over because, again, like we stated that day, our Indigenous population is a bigger community than just what our city limits do, and so they're really on board and celebrating with us over here. So that's in the morning. We have 2 things going on during the day. All of our schools will have events, youth events going on, and then MSUM is doing a cultural sensitivity training and opening that up to Concordia and M-State, and so because we feel like education is really important. And then in the evening, we're having the meal. It's a free meal and a powwow that night. Now, I know that that's a city council meeting evening, but what we would really like to see is traditionally when we do grand entries, we honor dignitaries and people who are special to us in our community, and we would love to honor you guys. As of right now, we have grand entry set at 6:30. I'm not sure what time you guys are typically done here, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out as further conversation because we would love to have all of you guys there, not only to be a part of it so we can honor you guys and the work that you guys have helped us get to, but also so that you can see and experience this amazing culture. If it helps to have grand entry at 7, so that you can get through meeting stuff, I don't know how that works. And I know that it's a lot of weird, quirky things. We obviously can't change the day. That's the whole point of the day. So I just wanted to put it out there, but we will have a more formal presentation. I think the third Monday, do you guys have meetings first and third Mondays? So
Second.
Second and fourth.
bam. So it's like the 4th then. I think we're on the agenda to actually give a more formal update. But I just wanted to tell you guys thank you. It took a lot of work, and I appreciate your guys' part in all of this. Thank you.
Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where would that be located? Where would that be
yep,
located?
sorry about that. So it's at the Moorhead High School. So the meal will be in the cafeteria, and then the high school in the auditorium will be hosting the powwow.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't say that.
That's okay.
I got nervous. It's 3 minutes.
You did a great job.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me.
Madam City
Heather,
Manager.
how late can you do it on that second Monday? Because it's going to be hard for the council to get done by then.
Yeah, and we understand that. I mean, and I don't know if it's something that we work more at this year, having as many there in the 9 o'clock in the morning
Oh,
session.
okay.
And then move forward, and maybe next year it falls on a different day. Or if, I don't know if one council member can be let go early, if I know that Deb or Commissioner White has been,
Deb's
I
good.
don't know, it's so formal. If maybe she could come in representation of the commission. I don't know what it looks like. But the thing is that we also have a community that's celebrating, and so to push it back too late, grand entry is always the very first part of starting the whole ceremony.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Anyone have any comments regarding Ms. Keeler's statements to the council? Thank you for the update. Next up, I have Lindsay, Amy, Cox, McQueen. And if you could just state your full name and your address. Thank you.
I am Lindsay Amy Cox -McQueen. My subject this evening shall be, once again, the Moorhead Library, a different aspect. I would ask this be considered outside the budget proposals that they've given. This is an ongoing problem it's been happening for a number of years. I've been up in the Fargo-Moorhead area, and I've seen the population explosion. Many of the people are good. Not everybody is good. The library environment is to be a safe environment for everyone, whether they're homeless or they live in a mansion. The librarians are being put in harm's way many times. Not all the characters that come in there are very nice, and they don't know how to behave. It's, I believe, the number 2 place for calls for the Moorhead Police. The Fargo Library System has a security officer on the first floor downtown, one on the second floor. Even the Fargo bus station has a security officer. I came here today because of something I saw last Friday, and I just had enough of it. A gentleman was in there, and I believe he was high, and he was going to sing for everybody. And actually 3 librarians came over to him. He seemed to have a rather much of a dislike for one, and I thought, I don't want to sit here and see a very nice librarian be assaulted. Several months ago on Facebook, I shared an article, I believe it was from Ohio, about a female librarian that went up and asked a gentleman to be respectful and to be less loud. Well, he didn't like that very much. He sat out in the parking lot, and he waited for her to come out there, and he killed her. Okay? We don't want that to happen here. We want a security guard in there. We don't want to have to wait for a police officer to be dispatched, okay? And, yeah, we need to have a security guard. We don't want these individuals to be angry and take it out on the librarians. Didn't have much time to do research on this to find out about all the budgets. I don't know if there's any emergency or slush fund, but something needs to be done to help these people. And it makes an environment where people don't always want to go in there, and I do hear that on the street. Oh, that's a place where people always hit me up for cigarettes, or somebody's acting up, okay? So we have little children in this environment, and I love the environment of the library. In fact, when I leave here, I'll be going to the Moorhead Library. I'm surprised they don't charge me rent, that one in the Fargo Library, okay? It's like, oh, it's you again. But, you know, I'll bring candy and stuff in. So I want to present that so further research could be done in this to help them. Thank you so much.
And thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah.
Does that raise any comments or any questions from council? Councilmember White.
And I'll direct it to our city manager. Is this something, could we get some information to, from law enforcement and the library and just follow back on this later on to look at it a little further?
Councilmember White, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Carlson and some city staff have talked about this with Megan and Liz recently, and we do have a budget problem, of course, with adding another officer or security. It would be very expensive to do that. We just don't, as you heard, they're asking for a $20,000 increase, and that's even a problem we're trying to figure out. But I'll let Councilmember Carlson address what they've been talking about, though.
Great. Thank you, City Manager, and thank you, Lindsay, for coming and bringing this kind of to the attention of the public. We did have a meeting with city staff, law enforcement, city manager's office, myself, and the library. We discussed the variety of issues that are happening at our library, very similar to what you have brought up. We acknowledge that there is a budget issue with bringing in a security. Ideally, that is what we would love to do. Short of that, though, we developed and are looking into other strategies that could be utilized in order to hopefully address some of those issues in the future.
Does that bring up Councilmember Watson Curry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just full disclosure, I was a former youth librarian at the Moorhead Library, so I'm aware of the range and of use of the library. When I was working there too, there was a trend, and I still believe that is a trend in public libraries, that they will have a social worker on staff. So while I would be in support of exploring, security, I think there are also other potential partnerships or roles that could be in the library that would help maybe diffuse some of the situations and also provide some more of the more intense services that maybe users of the space might require. So I believe that you guys are also aware of those too. So I know that's in the conversation and in the works, but just to consider those options as well. And I know space is limited as well. So just wanted to voice that.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember White.
If I could back up even, my question was even a little further back than that, of just looking at whether they could give us some information about some of the things that have been occurring. Because you mentioned that, you don't have data. That would be helpful for us even to make sure that we're well informed about any decisions that we make.
Yeah, Councilmember White, Mr. Mayor, Council, we actually do have data about what some of the incidents, all of the incidences, and what's been going on, so we can absolutely send that to the council, so you're fully informed on that. I would also like to add that we did add security cameras, or are adding them outside. Is that correct?
We'll be upgrading the security camera system and adding a few more.
And that was an expense we, the city of Moorhead, bore in addition to the budget. That's what we could do to help out immediately. So that was one little thing, but that doesn't cover everything, of course. So.
Thank you for that information, and thank you for your comments. Are there any other questions or any comments that people want to address on this topic? Okay. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. As you can see, we are, obviously, we have a vested interest in making sure that our library is safe and secure, and I would trust that Madam City Manager, in consultation with her executive leadership team, is going to be on top of that and let us know.
Thank you very
So,
much.
Thank you. I think we have a third person, and I'm sorry, I know the first name is Les, and I can't, as you can see, I'm wearing glasses for a reason. Les, Formy? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name. If you can state your full name, please, and your address.
Full name, Les Foreman, 3310 7th Avenue North, Moorhead.
Thank you.
Reason I'm here tonight, you know, I took some logic courses in college, and I looked what we did in the city this year. Miles of sidewalks where there are no residents. On 8th Avenue North, we've been fighting for 8 years to get a sidewalk. We have people who are walking. We have people who are pushing wheelchairs. We have people pushing baby carriages down the middle of the street. It's bad this time of year, but boy, when you look at the wintertime and how narrow that street is, there is no exit for Arbor Park. Now, we have a commitment again this year, we've had commitments many years, that they're going to get a contract made, and they might make it this year, they might make it next year. I think you guys are just waiting for somebody to get killed, and then you'll do something. Some of my neighbors have been fighting with the city for 11 years, trying to get a sidewalk back there. It's unsafe. I addressed this with our former mayor. I addressed it with the First Ward council members, and all we get is, yeah, it's a bad situation. And I'd like to have you folks work with the city engineer to make sure they get that done this year. They're saying, well, it's going to cost $100,000. If they did it when it should have been done, it probably wouldn't have cost hardly anything. They had an opportunity last year when Aldi's put in their parking lot. They had all the equipment, all that kind of stuff, but it just doesn't happen. And we're frustrated. I see ladies pushing baby carriages down the street. Then I see these people come roaring down the street in pickup trucks and cars, not even paying attention to what's going on. So I'm frustrated, and I'm looking for help.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. You still have time left if you still have time left. Are you complete, or because you still have time if you want to continue speaking?
No, I think I've said what I need to say.
Okay, thank you, sir, and I appreciate you speaking up about that. I'll pass it to Madam City Manager.
Sir, we are getting quotes actually in September, so we will have some bids, step in the right direction. And we are hoping, if the price is reasonable, we're hoping that to be able to do it this year, so we are getting quotes.
Well, even if the price isn't reasonable, I mean, you passed over all of the opportunities where you could have done it reasonably. And it just frustrates me to look at miles of sidewalks you put in this year where there are no residents. And you have a whole subdivision where all the residents have to go down that street. They don't have a sidewalk.
Well,
okay, so I'm, like I say, you can tell I'm frustrated. Because I've been fighting this for 4 years. My neighbor's been fighting it for 11 years, and nobody cares.
Well, Mr. Foreman, I will say, and I thank you for your comments, and thank you for bringing this up to our attention. I will tell you that, I mean, you know, I'm relatively new, but I can tell you that, you know, the city does care. You know, there's, what I'm learning in my you know, new experience is that there's processes, and not only are there processes, but there's research and there's things that really have to go on behind the scenes to get to that point, to be able to make what you're talking about come to fruition. So, I mean, the positive thing, though, is, I mean, the past is the past. And by the grace of God, no one's been injured that I know of, that we all have know of, but something's going to get done. And that's, you know, the thing that we need to embrace and move on. But, I mean, we do need, you know, people like you to bring this to our attention. And by bringing this here tonight, now the public knows that we're moving on it.
I appreciate that. I really do.
No, and having you bringing this concern is part of the citizen engagement that we need to have. So, Mr. Zimmerman, Dr. Zimmerman, our city engineer, sitting right back there, he's heard it. City manager's heard it. We've all heard it. And now there's going to be some action taken to protect the safety of those individuals.
Okay.
So we are on top of it.
Well, if you can get anything done to get it done this year, that would be appreciated.
We'll do the best we can, but you know we live in a really, really wild place where there's a lot of ever-changing weather. Not that that's an excuse, but if it doesn't get done, Mother Nature will have a say in whether that happens or not.
I understand.
Okay?
Okay.
So thank you again for bringing that up tonight. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. I do believe that takes care of our citizens addressing the council. I believe that's all the yellow sheets that I received. Madam Clerk, is that, we have no more? Okay. We will move forward. I'm assuming number 8, we can skip, or no?
No, yes, I'm sorry,
Okay,
yes.
didn't have an asterisk,
Yes.
so, you know.
That's correct, there's no
Just check and make
appointments.
sure. We'll move on to a public hearing. And, excuse me. So there's a public hearing to address regarding the request of James Mueller on behalf of Muscatel Properties LLC for a property tax exemption for a commercial project located at 1120 29th Avenue South, parcel number 58.58.163.0030. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion made by Councilmember Watson Curry, seconded by Councilmember Paulson. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are now in public hearing. Mr. Derek LaPointe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Just want to let you know we have a representative from Muscatel here. Case Muscatel is here if you have any detailed questions regarding the project. But what we have before us tonight, and you can mention or notice on your screen above, is a plan to construct a collision repair center. This would be adjacent to the new Muscatel Subaru dealership, Muscatel pre-owned. The building will be about 31,000 square feet, 3,000 which will be used for internal offices. The remaining square footage will be used for the collision repair services. The exterior construction will be precast concrete to match the other buildings on the campus. Parking lots will be concrete, include internal customer parking, as well as fleet vehicle parking as well. This also has plans to include green space and water retention areas surrounding the property, and really designed to be an attractive frontage for the I-94 corridor. Muscatel will employ 24 full-time positions at this facility. The plans, if approved tonight, they would begin construction in September of 2019 with an estimated completion of December of 2020. This project is zoned regional commercial, and the project proposal does meet all zoning requirements. Their financial considerations tonight, and based on our policy of the commercial industrial property tax exemption, is a total benefit of an exemption for $264,000 in new taxable value. The new project value is estimated at about $3.3 million. That equates to 1.6 tax percent rate, and it'll be for a period of 5 years. It's a great project. Muscatel's been a great partner to the city of Moorhead. They've done a wonderful job with their new facility. We're excited to see this one move forward. If you have any questions for myself or for Case, we're happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. LaPointe, for bringing that to our attention. Madam City Council, told you I'm a little rusty. Councilmember Dahlquist.
Thank you, Mayor. Is this going to be the same Muscatel Collision Center that was further down, and then you're just moving it?
I'll let Case come up and maybe just answer that specifically to
If it is,
the
they're
project.
great. We've had many, many accidents, and you guys have fixed it, and you did great.
Yes, so what we have going on is we're expanding to the point where we're out of space. We debated remodeling what we have, but with bringing in some younger techs into the business for us, we just realized that we just needed a bigger footprint to be able to put everyone in one building.
Well, thank you. You've done great work.
Well, glad to hear that.
Councilmember White.
I have a question. Well, first I wanted to say, I know several of us had an opportunity to tour your facility when we did the small business tour, and I was really impressed. And in particular, I loved all of the green efforts that you've made. And so first I wondered if you could, I don't know if everybody knows, if you could talk about those a little bit. And I just wondered if you're planning on doing any of those same things in this facility too.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, one of the big things we do is we do a lot of oil changes, 80 of them a day roughly. So that used oil needs to go somewhere, and we use it to actually heat our building. So it's a big savings for us, and it finds a use for that oil. As far as green space, we do as best we can with that. We have 100 trees on the property. We have as much as some days we don't like them. We have wild geese running all over the place. But that's a big piece of it. As far as the lights go, everything is timed so that they're not on. They don't need to be. Security systems, all that's all timed out really well. So we do our best to try to leave as little footprint as we can.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Watson Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along those lines, just the project highlights the use of green space and water retention, and I just wondered if we could kind of talk about that process, if that's something that would be existing within our code, if you were adding to that space. Hearing of a lot of concrete, I was really relieved to hear that we're thinking about where our water is going. So just a little education opportunity, if that's something that, regardless of who is developing the property, if that's something that would be included.
Sure. Well, with what we do, we need a lot of room for snow removal as well. So green space works really well for us in that regard. We do have a water retention to would be the east side of the property now. We would probably tie into that piece and make the piece bigger on that side. Then we would also adjoin with the tech school down the way from us there, Rasmussen, I should say, not tech school. And we would have some space there that would also be made for it.
Okay.
And I'll just mention as well, yes, because the site is over an acre, there was some stormwater retention requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember White.
I also wanted to mention one last thing. Are you is it fourth generation business in our community?
Yes.
Thanks.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, that's great. It once again shows that we have a history of successful businesses in our city. Right. So thank you for that. Absolutely. And also I want to say, after reviewing this as well, I like the fact that it's going to be very attractive on our corridor on 94. So that's awesome. So does that bring up any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing the presentation, is there anyone here in the audience that wishes to comment or speak on this public hearing? Is there anyone anyone here in the audience that wishes to comment or speak on this public hearing? Seeing, hearing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So second.
Motion made by Councilmember Duran, seconded by Councilmember White. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Public hearing is now closed. Moving on to 9A, a resolution to approve the property tax exemption for Muscatel Properties LLC for a commercial project located at 1120 29th Avenue South, parcel number 58.163.0030. Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Motion made by Councilmember White, seconded by Councilmember Duran. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you.
Can I steal the mic for like a minute? I just want to make one announcement too on the downtown plan. So we're having a pop-up event. We're scheduled for tomorrow at the Moorhead Dairy Queen, but the weather's not looking great. So we're maybe going to reschedule to Thursday, so stay tuned on that. But it's a pop-up event from 11:30 to 1:30 where we're getting public engagement. We'll also be at the Bridge Bash September 5th. So we'll be there collecting input, and then the large community open house is September 12th at the MCOMS, where we're having lots of traction, a lot of people engaged with that one as well, but that one's from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. So more to come with that, but I just wanted to get those couple plugs for the event this week and September 5th for Bridge Bash. So come out, public. We want to hear your thoughts and feedback on the vision for downtown.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. LaPointe, for bringing that up. Okay, that moves us on to item number 11, which is the flood mitigation update and related actions, engineering number 18-13-08. Dr. Bob Zimmerman, your show.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. A brief presentation for you tonight, and then a couple of follow-up actions requested. So the update here is really to the revised plan for in-town improvements that the council adopted last year. Given the funding that we've had available, I would say we've made some pretty meaningful progress over the last year. So this is a summary of the plan and priorities as was adopted last year. So along the left-hand side, each of the priorities 1 through 5, and then listed along with that different acquisitions and projects, which we'll discuss in a little more detail as we go through the presentation. The third column represents the total costs for each of those priorities. I would just note that based on additional information and what we've learned over the last year, we've revised some of these numbers. The total, however, stays within what was presented and adopted last year. And then the last column represents funds that have been either expended or would be committed with council action later this evening. The intent of showing that was to identify where we've placed most of our effort during the past year. The North Moorhead project was the number, or is the #1 priority project. And you'll note that that's where we've expended the majority of the funding. However, those priorities are not strictly rigid. There is some flexibility. We did have one property that's was identified as what we call a Category B acquisition. You'll see we expended some funds there. Happened to be a property that became available. The owners came to us interested in the city acquiring the property, so we wanted to take advantage of that. So all totaled, with what's been expended and committed since the adoption of the plan and since last November when we received some funding, we're at just over $7 million. Last November, the DNR awarded a grant to the city for $4 million for this work. And then earlier this year in April, there was an amendment to that grant, adding an additional $2 million, bringing us to $6 million total. After opening bids for the first phase of the North Moorhead project, it was pretty clear we needed some additional funding. So we talked to the staff at the DNR that managed this grant program, and they were able to scrape together an additional $1 million as a part of a proposed amendment to the grant, which would bring our total funding to $7 million. In terms of property acquisitions, there's a lot of words on this slide. I'll try to just simplify it. We categorized properties in 3 groups, A, B, and C. The A properties are those with elevations below river stage 39.5, and their existence presents some risk to either public infrastructure or other properties off of the riverfront. So those were the top priority. The Category B properties were also at that elevation below 39 feet river stage, but those properties in their locations do not present risk to public infrastructure or other properties off of the river, so they were a little bit lower priority. And then finally, category C would be properties above that 39.5 feet, but would be required to create a continuous line of protection at 44 feet. Why 39.5 feet? That's roughly the current 100-year floodplain. And with a future diversion project, at the 100-year floodplain would be at 37 feet plus freeboard for that project 2.5 feet, so that the two really tie together. This is a summary of the numbers of properties in each of those categories. There is more detailed information that will be available on our website. Following tonight's meeting, we'll post that tomorrow morning. Initially, we had 26 Category A properties. In our work for the North Moorhead project, we were able to actually remove one of those from the list, resulting in 26. We've completed 24 of those acquisitions. 23 of those are strictly for the North Moorhead project. We acquired the one Category B property that I mentioned. We did identify 2 that were inadvertently omitted from last year's list, so we added those back in. And then there were 23 Category C. So we've acquired 25 of 92 that were on our list as either an A, B, or C. These are the projects. Again, the North Moorhead project, we'll look at that in more detail on the next slide. And again, these maps are all available or will be available on the city's website. They're a little bit difficult to read at this scale. But the North Moorhead project, again, is our #1 priority. We'll be proceeding with that. The Riverview Circle Levee, 40th Avenue South Road raised on the south side of town. That project is a very short segment of levee and a small road raise on 40th Avenue that requires one additional property acquisition that we have not yet completed. The sanitary lift station project is just outside the door here, essentially. By the parking ramp, that's a lift station affected at a river stage of 35 feet. So we're going to relocate that. The First Avenue North levee and flood wall is a project to either raise or construct the flood wall on the north side of the First Avenue North underpass. As you all know now, and probably did before, during major flood events, that closes at some point. This project would allow that to stay open to a higher river stage. And then the last one is involves various upgrades to stormwater lift stations, pumps, and whatnot. So those are the projects, and again, there's more detailed maps that are available on the city's website. This is the North Moorhead project, again, our #1 priority. Just orientation-wise, north is to the left, not vertically. The green shading here represents the levee. The orange or reddish shading represents excavation. For example, on the far left-hand side, that's excavation of a stormwater pond that's needed for drainage for the project, but also provides essentially the dirt for the levee. We have acquired all of the property necessary to proceed to construction. We don't have funding available to build the entire project, but we do have funding available with this most recent DNR grant award to proceed with phase 1, which is what's shown in the box. And so one of the actions tonight for the City Council would be to consider awarding the bid for that first phase of construction, which will begin this fall, primarily with demolition of buildings that were acquired, maybe some storm sewer work. The bulk of that work will likely take place next spring and summer, with completion sometime in the fall. So this is a summary of the funding to date, assuming this additional DNR grant amendment. Total post-2009, just under $113 million. The state obviously has been a magnificent partner in all of this work, contributing $80 million. City's contribution is a little bit over $32 million. Of that, 14.6 was the required match for those grant funds, and 17.6 represents an overmatch committed by the City Council in previous years to keep work going, keep the momentum going on work that was proceeding post-2009. The table represents just a summary, a brief summary of the work completed, so you'll note we're now up to 268 voluntary acquisitions, which is, in my mind, absolutely incredible that many people would voluntarily participate. And we've actually increased the number of partial acquisitions pretty significantly with this North Moorhead project. We were able to use partial acquisition or easements rather than full acquisition for parts of that project. Again, levees for all of our projects are constructed to a top elevation of 44 feet, flood walls to 45 feet. That does not mean we're protected to those levels. Sometimes that gets misconstrued a little bit. That's the top of the levee. We need some distance between the top of the levee and the water surface, some factor of safety, which is called freeboard. Typically 3 feet is what we would like to see. A little bit about FEMA accreditation. So the primary goal in all of the work that we've completed is really to protect public infrastructure and property. A secondary goal has been to achieve FEMA accreditation of certain projects that we've completed. That the value of FEMA accreditation is that the property protected by the project is removed from the floodplain, and that removes the mandatory flood insurance requirements. So a few years ago, we would have shown this table with no completion dates. And if you go down the list now, you'll note that we have completed FEMA accreditation in every area but one. The most recent completion was the 50th Avenue South area. That was, the formal approval for that was May 17th of this year. I would note that 2 of those projects, I use the word our sort of collectively. Buffalo Red River Watershed District actually completed 2 of those, and we're grateful for the work they did there. We do have one remaining project, that's that Riverview River Oak Circle project. Again, that requires 1 additional acquisition and a little bit of construction. In all, 533 parcels removed from the floodplain and 330 structures that no longer have a mandatory flood insurance requirement. This may be a little bit difficult to see, but it's really interesting information. It's the history of DNR grants that have been awarded to the city post-2009, all the way through the pending grant agreement before the council tonight for slightly over $1 million. I think the point of this is that the DNR tends to award funds where they know they can be expended, and they don't commit massive sums of money somewhere that doesn't get expended. And so therefore you can see the number of different amendments and the number of grants that we've received over the years, primarily because of success in completing acquisitions and projects. A couple weeks ago, the DNR staff that works with this grant program contacted us, in addition to talking about the grant amendment, asked about what our capability would be for future funding, what's left on our list. We had our priority list, pretty easy to provide that. We took a look at that in terms of what we thought we could actually deliver. So we broke this up into different periods of bonding bills, so typically 2020, 2022, and 2024, so those 2-year periods beginning with those years. And we're very confident that in 2020 and 21, we could complete the 2nd phase of the North Moorhead project, complete about half of the Category B acquisitions. The primary interest in that group right now is on 40th Avenue North. There's about 15 properties there that have never received an acquisition offer, and so we would love to get one to them. They've requested appraisals. I think all of them have requested appraisals that we're currently completing, with the idea that we would execute option agreements with them to close the deal should funding become available next legislative session. The sanitary lift station project, the First Avenue North project, and the stormwater lift stations require no property acquisition. They're purely infrastructure projects. And so we're very confident that we could deliver on those in that 2-year time frame. Looking at what was left on the list then in the 2022, 2023 years, we would propose completion of Category B acquisitions. Don't know exactly the level of interest in the remaining properties out there, and then really focus on that Riverview Circle 40th Avenue South project. So that the information through at least 2023 is what we provided to the DNR. I would note that as part of the capital budget system, the state capital budget system, just like we made requests for projects, the state agencies make requests. The DNR has requested $20 million per biennium over the next 3 bienniums. Bienniums, is that the proper? Okay, John says yes, I believe it. That's obviously not going to be enough, if at least in terms, and that's statewide, right? So the legislative lift here is to really support their program and to encourage the legislature to allocate more to that program than what they have requested. So that's what we've provided. That's what we think we can deliver on. Just a couple of brief slides about flood risk. As you all recall, we just went through a flood event this past spring. Number 10 on the all-time list of the period of record for the Red River, which dates back to approximately 1900. Interesting to note that 8 of the top 10 flood events have been within the last 30 years, which tends to lead to the conclusion that not only are magnitudes increasing, but frequencies are changing. And this information is also something that sort of came to light after this most recent flood event. And now that you're all flood veterans, this will make sense to you, but I'll explain what's here. So as you recall, when we early in the year start thinking about the potential for flooding, the National Weather Service issues their probabilistic forecasts, and those are percent chances of certain flood stages based on conditions and forecasts that they make. They start those roughly in January and update those until essentially the event begins with a deterministic forecast. So a percent chance of a given river stage. So these numbers represent the final probabilistic forecast for each of those flood years. So flood years 2001, 6, 9, 10, 11, 13, and 19, the most recent flood events. I don't believe they issued probabilistic forecasts prior to 2001 because I don't know that they had the technology available to do it. And then across each row then is the different percent chance from that last forecast, from the 90% chance down to the 10% chance, so the 10% chance being the least likely, right? That's all the black numbers. The red numbers here represent the actual flood crest, now having the benefit of historical perspective. We've been through the event. We know what the actual crest was. So the red numbers show what the actual crest was for each of those flood years. And we put those in the boxes that most closely match the number for a given probability. So, for example, 2001, the last probabilistic forecast, 10% chance was 36.6. The actual flood crest was 36.69. 2006, you'll note we ended up again in that 10% or least likely probability with a flood crest of 37.13, as well as in 2009 with their 10% forecast at 40.7 and a crest of 40.84. 2010, a little bit different. We ended up in that 60% forecast box, forecast 36.9, crest of 36.99. 2011 in the 50% box with a crest of 38.8, and then 13 and 19 both ended up in the 90% chance box. 13 and 19 both essentially the ideal melt conditions, right? The point of showing that is that those 10% flood events, those 10% forecasts do happen. They did in 2001, they did in 2006 and 2009. It's interesting to look at the 10% forecast chances for 10, 11, and 12. 42.7 in 2010, 43 in 2011, and 42.4 in 13. Remember, top of levee is 44 feet for all the infrastructure that we've constructed. Ideally, we need a factor of safety or freeboard. Ideally, that's at least 3 feet. The reason for that is to account for unknowns, for variability in the forecast. You could have a debris or an ice jam someplace that could change river stages dramatically very quickly. So you want that extra factor of safety or freeboard. So you'll note that had we experienced those 10% chance crest levels for those events, we would not have had 3 feet of freeboard. And just to do the math for you, we would have had anywhere from 1 to 1.6 feet during those flood events, which is really the driver behind the need for comprehensive flood mitigation. In addition to the work we're doing in town, the two really fit together. So that was a new piece of information that we've never had a chance to share with the City Council, and thought it would be worthwhile to show that. And with that, again, there's 2 actions proposed tonight. The first one to authorize the amendment to the flood damage reduction grant for roughly $1 million, and then secondly, to award the bid for phase 1 of the North Moorhead project. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman. Does that present any questions, Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple questions, Bob, and these are really kind of directed from constituents that had questions about flood control in South Moorhead. And I just wanted to raise some concerns because I was a little concerned talking to some of these folks and some of the issues they brought up. And I think this is a good time to just maybe bring it up to see where they fall in the project program, obviously contingent upon funding, right? 2 specific constituents reached out to me, concerned that they are currently in the 100-year floodplain. However, they felt they shouldn't be because our permanent protection should be completed in certain areas. And the reason it's not completed is because there's homes in the way. I'm assuming these are Category A homes. And they mentioned they're paying assessments on some of their flood control work, but they're not seeing any of the benefit from that. And I think it just it shows that there's inequity out there where people have paid for their flood control, but they're not getting it because there's a house that doesn't want to move, right? So do we know how many of those homes are still in the 100-year floodplain that are required to carry flood insurance because one of their neighbors does not want to move out of their homes?
To the best of, I got to find the right slide. Thanks for the question. To the best of our knowledge, and without a detailed property-specific survey, what you're talking about is that last row on this table, and our best estimate, there are 17. There is one acquisition required in that area before we would be able to proceed with the levee and road raise that would provide the opportunity for FEMA accreditation.
You know, that's good to hear, Bob, and, you know, that would be amazing if we could bring those 17 structures out of the 100-year floodplain. But it's not, these residents, it wasn't only the inequity of having to pay an assessment but not seeing the benefit of it. It was the risk during these potential flood events, where now they've paid for permanent flood protection, but in essence, they're being protected by a temporary levee that would be constructed around this one house that's there. And their livelihood is contingent upon that levee system holding. And we can see even our permanent flood protection could potentially only have 1 foot of freeboard during a very extreme event. And that's just not good enough for these people. I guess they're upset that there hasn't been anything done. And so I guess I'm raising the issue here at the council level so other council members can hear that there are people that feel like they're basically being shortchanged on this. They're paying for flood control. They should have had permanent flood control. They're still in the 100-year floodplain. They're still required to carry flood insurance. All because there's one holdout house in the way. So I just wanted to bring up that inequity because I think it's fairly glaring, and you know, it'd be great if the city could figure out a way to deal with the one property owner. You know, obviously we get into the realm of condemnation, those sorts of things to you know, remove somebody from their house, but I know there's certain neighbors in these areas that would love to see this one house spot out, and they're looking to the city council for leadership in this issue. So thought I'd bring it up. It's a great transition into Bob's presentation here, and I thank you for your in-depth and robust presentation. And so I'll just leave it at that. I know we're not going to figure this out tonight, but it's certainly something that I think the council needs to be cognizant of, and something that, you know, honestly, I wasn't 100% aware of until these folks reached out. So,
Councilmember White.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Paulson, because I know you and I have talked about it, and I've also spoken with folks in that area. And even for the short term, one of the things I was wondering is, since we've had the spring flood, now as we move ahead, I know we've spoken with this particular homeowner before, but will we be reaching out to them again
I'm positive we did so after the flood event.
after this flood this spring?
We've reached out to that property owner numerous times since 2009.
Okay. I just wondered if, I meant since this particular spring, some of us spoke with him, and I was wondering if it would be a good time to try one more time.
We can always try again.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I do a follow-up question?
Absolutely. Councilmember Paulson has a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So let's just predict that the funding will come through, because the DNR has been very good to the city of Moorhead over the years. And we get funding to acquire that house. As of right now, we're not taking the stance of buying people out, basically, that are not voluntary buyouts. So we could still potentially get the money, still be able to take these 17 houses out of the 100-year floodplain, but we wouldn't do it unless they volunteered to take a buyout.
Thus far, if I understand the question right, thus far, all of our acquisitions, the entire program has been voluntary. And I might add, extremely successful. I would never have thought we would have acquired all the North Moorhead project property within the short time frame that we did. So it would be a shift in council's priority and program, and it's certainly at the discretion of the council to do that at some point in time, now or in the future, to consider a program that was not entirely voluntary. To do that, I would suggest that we would likely take a look at each property that's out there in terms of what are the impacts and how aggressively would you want to pursue a particular property. I personally would like to get through one more attempt at all of those Category B properties in a voluntary program and then reassess where we are. I know that doesn't provide the short-term solution that some property owners like or would prefer, and I totally understand that. But I think there would be a huge benefit to trying to get through one more attempt at our Category B properties.
Can I also ask Bob, how much of this would go away if the diversion were to be built in the 37-foot is the new 100 years through town?
So, excellent question. All of our work has been coordinated with that future 37 feet. What goes away is that last row of this table. All of those properties in Category C, I think there's 23 of them, are high enough elevation we would not need to acquire those. And quite frankly, we might have a different perspective of some of the Bs at some point in time.
Sure.
Not all of them, but some of them.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where you might not be so aggressive with certain ones as other ones.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just taking some notes here. Does that bring up any question, Councilmember White?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is a question. I can just say it was a learning experience for me when we went through the flood and just talking to folks that were affected by this. And I think I came away with a sense that there's more background. There's more, on face value, it may seem very simple. Why won't this one person sell? But there's more to it than that. And there's people's lives and their families and all of that. But there's also the neighbors that are affected by it. And I don't know what the solution is, but I would love to see us before we, just because I love Moorhead and I love the people in Moorhead and how we are towards each other. And before we moved away from something voluntary, even just an opportunity to bring those people together so that whether we reach a solution or not, just because I can see, beyond the buyout, just that there's been growing tension in that area because people, this is their lives and their families are at stake. So maybe even just doing something to bring folks together that might help alleviate some of those tension, help with understanding, and maybe move us a little closer to a solution too. So I'm not sure, that's definitely, that I wouldn't want to just put that on your shoulders, but I would be willing to help with something like that so that we could have those conversations that might make a little progress, at least in some areas.
Madam City Manager Volkers.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. City Council, Bob, there are other options as well. I think there will be a point where the council needs to reevaluate the current policy that it's completely voluntary, but not possibly to go as far as the alternative. There might be other options such as purchase the property, offer a voluntary buyout, but let them stay in the property for a while, for 5 years, or rent it back or something like that. So there's an end. I mean, there are other options we might want to start talking about in addition to the ones discussed today. So, or for the council to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman, for the presentation. I guess the biggest thing that hearing everyone talk, I think seem to be focusing the conversation on this one individual homeowner, and I guess I just don't want, because there are a lot of people watching this evening, that we're, placing any blame or burden on this one individual homeowner. And I think we just need to tread lightly about how we approach this. I don't think we need to also rush into a changing of the council's policy regarding voluntary buyouts in light of what we've learned tonight. So I think I would echo Councilmember White's sentiments that we, just be sure that we're being cautious and treading lightly, because I think if that person or individual is watching tonight, they're probably feeling like they're kind of put on the spot. And I don't think that we here at the council or staff should be doing that. I'm not insinuating that we are, but I think we need to tread lightly as we move forward, because that could give that perception that we are. So, is that? So that's all that I have, but thank you everyone for the conversation. And again, I think City Manager Volkers, Dr. Zimmerman, whatever you find out that we need to look at in your research, I think we should have a future conversation about that. City Attorney Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've spent a lot of time looking at this, and probably one of the most interesting takeaways from being a kind of a data nerd is that if you look at, and if you flip to that chart, Bob and I have had this conversation, so he probably knows what's coming, that all those years that we flooded, the percentage chance where it goes from the 10% to 90% chance, if you overlay that with the weather patterns in April and May, depending upon the speed of your melt, that will really dictate whether you're in a 10% or 90% year. And the risk for the city is that from an administration standpoint, when you're in March, how do you know what the weather's going to be like in April? And so that for me was the most interesting part about all of the data. This one chart just has so much information, and if you overlay the weather patterns for April and May, it's really interesting just to think about from a city planning perspective, because you're in March, do you plan for the 10% chance or do you plan for the 90% chance? And your only variable in planning is what's the weather going to be like, which is, you know, that's a challenge predicting what the weather is going to be like in a couple days, let alone a month or two out. So just, you know, kudos to the staff on how they handle that. But it's, to me, it was probably the most interesting part of the whole graph and chart.
Well, as always, thank you for your work, Dr. Zimmerman. I know you put in a lot of research and time to put these presentations together, and it's a lot of work and effort. So thank you again for doing that.
You bet.
Does that bring about any other comments or questions regarding Dr. Zimmerman's presentation? Thank you again, sir. Then with that, let me flip back here. There is a, moving to item 11A, and then Madam City Manager, City Attorney Shockley, we need to do both of these separately, A and B, I presume, or can they be done together?
You could do them together, Mr. Mayor.
Is there anyone that would be willing to make a motion to approve first 11A, a resolution to authorize amendment number 2 to flood damage reduction grant number 149304/300014260, and 11B, a resolution to award the bid for the North Moorhead Project Phase 1, engineering number 18-13-08B together. Is there anyone that would be willing to make?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve both resolutions, A and B.
Motion made by Councilmember Paulson, seconded by Councilmember Carlson. Any further discussion on these items? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. I believe that takes us to item number 17, which is to consider the first reading of ordinance 2019-07 to create and enact section 13.09 of the charter of the City of Moorhead relating to chamber membership and private organization memberships. So, do we need, well, I defer to City Attorney Shockley on this one first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding from the last discussion with the city council was there was some concern about the and other private organizations in the charter provision, the proposed charter provision. You have to either vote on what's presented to you, or if you want to table it and send it back to the Charter Commission with the, telling them your concern and asking them to amend it. Those are really your two alternatives. I do note that it takes a unanimous vote of the city council. Former Councilmember Gertz's seat is not counted, so you would need 7, plus the mayor needs to vote affirmatively for the charter amendment. But if there's a desire to send it back to the Charter Commission with some sort of recommendation or message from the council, that it's totally up to the council how you want to proceed.
Thank you, City Attorney Shockley. I watched the last meeting on my vacation, so, yeah, that was awesome. So, point being is, I think there was some discussion regarding the language. Do we still need to take that discussion up this evening regarding any language concerns about the amendment? No? Okay. Councilmember Hendrickson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will vote for this. I'm a little bit hesitant though, because you could, with these private organization memberships, that worries me, because you could have extremes on either side of the political spectrum. And if you had 8 council members with that extreme partisan rhetoric or beliefs, and a mayor, I mean, we could vote ourselves into the extreme, these extreme people. So I'm hesitant to vote for it. I will support it, but there's some concerns for me. And it could be, and it wouldn't be religious, it would just be extreme parts of the political spectrum on both sides. So that concerns me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Hendrickson. Does that raise any comments or questions regarding Councilmember White?
Sure, I'll just reflect back. I think one of the citizens spoke on this point, and just to say, in the end, it still takes a majority or a super majority to pass it. And if we did happen to have a council that was elected by citizens that had such extreme views, then that, first of all, if that's what the citizens wanted, then, they have that right to have people that have those particular views. And if you had a case where a council acted in a way that was truly counter to the views of the citizens, then it is the right of the citizens in Moorhead to vote those people out. And so, I think there are other protections in place that would keep it from being where we would have a council that would move in a direction that was that counter to the citizens of Moorhead.
Councilmember Hendrickson.
What are those protections then?
We have elections.
Elections, but there's really no, I mean, these extreme groups could do a lot of damage in 2 years. So that's what I'm worried about. I know elections count, but I mean, you could do a lot of damage in 2 years. So that's what I'm concerned about. But I will support it. I mean, I think it's good we're going to be a member of the chamber. I think it's, it's a good organization for Moorhead. So, but those are my concerns.
Thank you, both Councilmember White and Hendrickson, for your words. Does that raise any questions or thoughts from anyone else? Okay. All right. So, City Attorney Shockley, I'm going to ask you, because I still consider myself a newbie after 8 months. As far as the reading is concerned, can you please explain the protocol as far as what would happen now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You would want a motion and a second, as with any ordinance, and then you would want a roll call vote, because it takes unanimous approval, and you should also call the mayor for voting.
And then before we go on that, too, I want to just also ask, so again, this is not passed as into a change in our ordinance until after the third reading.
Second reading.
Second reading?
Yep.
And so then if people still wish to comment on this, they can come to the next council meeting and address any concerns or any thoughts that they have regarding this ordinance as well.
Correct.
I also want to make that known to the public that, to encourage engagement, that if any resident has any comments or thoughts or questions regarding this ordinance and this resolution to change it, please feel free to do so at the next, or I guess prior to the next council meeting. So, just want to put that out there. So then, any further discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Made by Councilmember Watson Curry.
Do you need me to read everything? You didn't do it this time.
I suppose I need to read it.
I move to approve that we create and enact Section 13.09 of the Charter of the City of Moorhead relating to chamber membership and private organization memberships.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Councilmember White. Any further discussions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Roll call.
Oh, yes, roll call. Thank you. Madam Clerk, yes, we need a roll call vote.
Shelley Dahlquist,
Can I ask one more question? We're doing 3 readings?
No, it would just be tonight and then one additional reading. It's like any other ordinance, it takes 2 readings. You've already had the public hearing on it, so you just need a first reading and a second reading. Tonight is the first reading.
I misspoke.
Shelley Dahlquist,
No.
Sarah Watson Curry,
Yes.
Shelley Carlson,
Yes.
Heidi Duran,
No.
Joel Paulson,
Yes.
Deb White,
Yes.
Chuck Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mayor Judd.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there's 2 noes.
Motion fails. So with that being said, will there still be a second reading or no?
We can have a second reading if that's what the council wants, but if there's 2 no votes to it, I don't know. This is up to the council. If you want to have a second reading when you don't have sufficient votes on your first reading, I don't know. That's a council decision.
Okay.
We can put it on the next agenda if you like, but
I'm really asking for clarification because this is my first time going through this. So I just want to make sure if we're following the protocols, what are most important is what's most important to me. So if historically, has there been?
historically, we've typically had both readings, even when it fails. Just the second, I think that people who voted against it the first time wanted to reiterate why they were voting against it the second time. But that's a policy decision. I'm not going to get in the middle of.
Well, that's fine. I'm really asking, no, and I'm not asking you to. I'm really asking for clarification because if this comes up again in 4 years, I want to know what the policy or the procedure is. So thank you for mentioning that. Councilmember Duran.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think if we add it, or if we keep it on the schedule, it gives, maybe it gives additional time for members of the community to come forward and request, some contact with those of us who may not be in favor of changing the charter. So I would not be opposed to seeing it on the agenda for a second reading.
Councilmember Hendrickson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Duran. I think if we let the public kind of soak it in a little bit, so maybe they'll come with the next reading. So I'd like it to be on the agenda too again.
Councilmember or Madam City Manager, you're looking like you want to say something.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what happens if the vote changes second reading. I don't know. We have to check that.
Yeah, we'll get clarification regarding that, so.
Okay, no, that's fine. Again, I merely ask my questions because this is the first time for me, and I'm humbled to know that I don't know it all, so I'm asking people who've been through this before to educate all of us. So, so now, if we have two council members that are willing to consider hearing it for a second reading after public engagement. Is that okay for folks? Do I need a consensus, or is this just good enough to put it back on for a second reading?
Mr. Mayor, usually we look around and do head nods for something like that. I'm seeing head nods for the second reading, so.
Okay. All right. So we have head nods. And everyone's nodding up and down. So that's an affirmative. So I'll interpret it that as such. Okay. All right. So then that moves us to agenda item number 19, which is a resolution authorizing a contract with Minnesota Department of Transportation for 2020-2021 transit capital projects. And I apologize.
Ms. Van Beek.
Ms. Van Beek. Thank you.
Sure. Mayor and City Council, tonight's request is for an approval to submit a grant application to the Minnesota Department of Transportation for a capital grant for the 4-year period 2020 to 2023. This is a new grant process that the state of Minnesota has put out there. It's due August 30th. And even though it is a 4-year request for grant projects, they will only be awarding contracts for the first year of those 4 years at this time. The 4 years allows them to plan ahead and to look at the different funding sources that they administer, both state and federal, and also the federal funds that we get portioned as a city, and some of the other cities do as well, to make sure that all the capital grant needs are being met and that they are in approval of what's being funded. So the state grant application is for projects over $5,000. It includes vehicles and transit facilities and non-vehicle capital needs. Up on the board and in your packet is the 2020 projects that are currently in the proposed budget, and those are listed. The first one is a large transit bus, a replacement bus from a 2005 bus that has surpassed its 5-year life and will have reached 500,000 miles. And that grant has already been approved by council and put in place, and that vehicle is going to be delivered in 2019, but it's still in our capital improvement plan for 2020, and the state needs to know that we'll be funding that with our 5307 funds. The project is for the Metro Transit Garage Shop, and that is for a diesel particulate filter cleaner. The system on the bus that burns off the exhaust has a filter, and those filters are expensive to replace, approximately $9,000 a piece. And so this piece of equipment will make it so that we don't have to replace them. Instead, we can clean them, and they will last the life of the vehicle. And so that's a project shared with the city of Fargo. Moorhead's share is a third, and then a local match to that is 20%. And then the third project is upgrading our lighting in the transit garage. That was occupied in January of 2007. It's 12 years old, and we need to replace our lighting, and we'd like to upgrade to LED because that will be very energy efficient in the long term and pay for itself. Again, it's a shared project with Fargo. Moorhead's third share is $33,333, and then our local match is 20%, about $7,000. We have 2 paratransit buses that we need to replace that have reached their maximum life of 5 years, 150,000 miles, and those would be funded in 2020 at $174,000 together, and the local share match is $34,800. And then as part of our ADA transition plan, we are replacing 1 shelter per year, improving accessibility and replacing the concrete. And we're looking to do 1 shelter again in 2020 at a cost of $30,000, and the local match would be $6,000 of that. So those are the projects that are currently in the proposed Moorhead capital improvement plan. The city manager has allocated in the past $150,000 each year for the projects that are in the CIP. And so that does fall within that $150,000 that we're setting aside in the 10-year plan for capital projects. There are some projects above and beyond what we had in the capital improvement plan. One of them is the Green Light Priority Signal Project with the engineering department and the city engineering department. We'd be partnering with them. They have been improving the traffic signals to have an emitter or have a system on them, and we would help them pay for that for those traffic signals that are along Moorhead routes. And there are 83% of the traffic signals yet to be done are along Moorhead bus routes. What that would do for the transit system is it would hold the green for 10 seconds or start the green 10 seconds earlier as if a bus is in the proximity of the traffic signal, and that way that bus route won't get stopped as often. It'll keep its timing better, be more reliable and on time for performance. And that the project was originally estimated to be $750,000, but it is not going to be that much, according to our traffic engineer. The cost to put the emitters on the buses is very minimal, about $500 per bus, and we have 12 buses to do that too. And then the actual signals have to be improved and traffic controls while they're doing that. And so the local share match of that project is about $173,000. As you may recall, in 2019, MnDOT lowered the local share match for our operating grants, and in doing so, our property tax money that we had set aside to pay for that is not expected to be needed. And that is approximately $150,000. And so we would be using that money. It is up to the council's discretion how they'd like to use that money because it is general fund property tax money. But we're proposing that we use that to pay for the traffic signals that are not along transit routes, and then the 20% match for those that are along transit routes, so that we could complete this project. And this project then would help all of our emergency vehicles as well. The next project is in Dilworth, and it is the Dilworth Walmart Transit Hub. This project was identified in our transit facility analysis that we had done, and we have approached the city of Dilworth. They are going to have this on their council agenda tonight as well. And it's for a $250,000 improvement to the hub at the Walmart in Dilworth, and the design work for that as well. And Dilworth is going to use their property tax savings from the transit reduction in 2019, and also I've asked Walmart to participate in that as well. And so that is currently being worked out with Walmart. They have not yet approved it, but are in consideration of that, and it's on the Dilworth Council tonight for that local share match. So there would be no Moorhead local share match involved in that project, but we would be providing some of our federal grant money, which is based on population and includes Dilworth's population. So those are the 2020 projects for this grant application. As I was saying, it's a 4-year list of projects, and so we have a 10-year plan, and what we did is, I don't know how to do this. Which button do I push? Oh, I tried that one. Okay, I didn't push it hard enough. So these are the other 3 years, 2021, 2022, and 2023 of the projects that are identified in our plan. Some of these projects, as well as the ones from 2020, have already been identified as from MnDOT to be funded with their federal apportioned money, or their federal money that they control, the Section 5339 and the Surface Transportation Block Group Program. And so in parentheses behind each project is a funding source identified, and the ones that the state has selected have the numbers that are not 5307, and the ones that we have are proposing for our money have 5307 after them. And so those are the projects. They're basically mostly vehicle replacements as they've reached their maximum life. Some shelter replacements. Again, we're trying to do one shelter each year to bring those up to ADA accessibility codes, and replace the shelters that most of which we bought in 1980. And then in 2022, there is a project at the Mentor Transit Garage for replacing our HVAC systems and our washers and some of our large components that have now reached, an age of, well, they'll be 15 years old by then and need to be replaced. And that's a shared project with Fargo. The auto vehicle system, out-of-vehicle location, and out-of-voice announcement system, that's on board the bus that tells you in real time where the buses are and makes announcements as it goes down the road. That will be 20 years old at that time, and with technology changes, needs to be replaced, and that's a joint project with Fargo. Otherwise, most of it, the rest of it is all vehicles and equipment that's just being replaced as it ages. So that's the request today, is for approval to submit the 4-year grant application and to authorize contracts for those that are selected from the 2020 listing. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Van Beek. Does that bring about any questions or comments from anyone? Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, how do these projects fit into our budget planning? Are they fit into our budget planning, or are we approving projects before we have budgets created? I mean, how often does that occur, and is that a good idea?
Councilmember Durant, Mayor and City Council, that's a really good question. So we always struggle with this issue because the state requires Lori to get this done in July, and our budget process, as you know, the preliminary isn't done until September 30th. So what she shared tonight is accurate, that I'm proposing in my budget recommendations to you $150,000 in capital so she can start building like an enterprise, it's not an enterprise fund, but a fund, so she can be level off her purchases of buses every year and her capital expenses. Because what had been going on in the past is one year there'd be 3 buses, right? And our match would be 100,000, that's 300,000. Next year it'd be 0. And our capital was all over the place. So now we've got a 10-year plan. We have a plan, that's good. And so that 150,000 is in our capital recommendations to you that we will be discussing next week. We have about a $2.5 million capital budget request to you. So in answer to your specific question, no, you have not approved. It is my recommendation. She had to submit the grant with all this information, and if the council decides no, and we just aren't able to fund it, we will have to decline the grant for the match.
Thank you. That was my only concern, so everything else sounds good.
Good question, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? The only comment I'll bring up, and maybe it's, I'm not sure if it's a question, but I'm looking at, I made a note here, page 106 of the agenda. I mean, it's the last paragraph on page 106, which talks about the reducing the 2019-2020 UPass fee to colleges. Can you briefly explain, Ms. Van Beek, what that's all about?
Yes. When the state reduced our local share match for operating grants by 10%, it did 2 things. It saved our property tax money, which is up to the discretion of the council how they'd like to use it, but it also decreased the need for our fare box revenue that we put into the cost of the system. Fare box revenue is revenue generated by the transit system and has to stay in the transit system under the state requirements. And so that money stays there, and we have to propose different projects that the state has to pre-approve for spending that excess revenue from fare boxes. So when we brought the operating grant to you a while back here, we had proposed reducing the UPass fee because they pay a portion of the fare box revenue from the colleges for the students to use the UPass fee. So since our local share was reduced, we had suggested that we could reduce their portion from 2019 and 2020's academic year a little bit too, and pass that on to them. And then we also had recommended that we use some of that money in paying for that wage increase for drivers that we approved in August. So we pretty much figured out how much we were going to save by that 10% and what we thought would be good projects, and proposed them to you in both operating and in capital.
Do you know off the top of your head what type of reduction that UPass fee would be to the students?
Well, we were proposing originally a 10% increase, and we reduced the increase to 5%. So it was about $5,000 that we reduced it.
Councilmember White.
Just a follow-up with that, in case people are wondering, because I know we make separate agreements with the different campuses. And so even though we have NDSU students that also have UPass, but this would just be for the Minnesota, because we do M-State, Concordia, and MSUM. So the fee reduction that we're talking about would be on the Minnesota side. So that the money that came back would go towards the Minnesota students, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, just want to make sure.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councilmember White. Does that bring about any questions or comments from anyone? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Van Beek, for your presentation.
Thank you.
So that, moving on, is there a motion to support this resolution to authorize this contract with MnDOT?
So moved.
Okay. Motion made by Councilmember White, seconded by Councilmember Dahlquist. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. On agenda item number 20, which is a resolution to approve the 5-year renewal of nonprofit lease between the City of Moorhead and the Fargo Public School District. Mr. Damo.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. So tonight, the council was asked to approve a 5-year renewal of an existing lease between the Fargo School District and the City of Moorhead for a support area around Bluestem. And so this was property that was purchased for flood protection a number of years ago. That work is now complete and helps protect the neighborhood. And boy, this would be the third extension of a lease that originally was made for 2 years and then 5 years, and now this would be an extension of 5 years to support an area that is, you know, really pretty special, uniquely Moorhead, and there's some amazing experiences that happen. I just can't help every time I talk about this place to just stop there for a second and say that, you know, I mean, I'm going to be there Thursday night. I'll be there. I think there's anyway. It's a place where very special memories are being made all over Moorhead, and it's a true gem. And so the Fargo School Board has reviewed, discussed, and approved the lease. There are no additional changes to the terms and or no costs to do so, and the recommendation is to approve it tonight.
Councilmember Durand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my only question would be, or concern about this is, was the name Trollwood Performing Arts School Facility always in the lease agreement, or did we change that from Bluestem? Because Bluestem is the facility, and the Performing Arts program is just housed in that center. So I don't want to take away from something that is uniquely Moorhead by changing those interchanging those names.
So, Councilmember Duran, there is a long history of that property out there. That was one of the first projects that I worked on as the Assistant City Attorney. Bluestem there was a nonprofit that was by the name of Bluestem that ultimately went defunct. The school district had to step in pursuant to the agreements and take over. And so as part of that arrangement, they just kept referring to it as the Trollwood facility because there was concerns about, from a legal perspective, about the reuse of that prior name. I could give you a whole history. I'm not prepared to.
I'm familiar with the history. I served on the Bluestem Advisory Committee, and one of our biggest issues was this name and interchanging the two names, and it was very clear that we wanted to identify it as separate, that it's not Trollwood. It's Bluestem that houses the Trollwood program. It was very adamant.
So,
City Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Duran, I wonder, are you looking at the resolution?
No, I'm looking at the actual.
The lease?
The lease agreement says the same thing. It talks about the Trollwood Performing Arts. Whereas the landlord and tenant previously entered into a nonprofit lease for the Trollwood Performing Arts Center support site for a term of 2 years. So it is referred to that in the lease.
Yeah, Councilmember Duran, that is on also the lease from 2015, so we copied that language. What I think might be also as important is a resolution. I see we drafted it citing Trollwood Performing Arts Center, and I wonder if we should delete that
There
Is
was, there was actually some reasons that we did not use the Blue Stem name.
Okay.
Because there was, the nonprofit was going out of business. And so I'd have to go back through and do a whole explanation of the transaction. But after the nonprofit went defunct, the school district stepped in and they should have stepped in, don't get me wrong. And as part of that, they needed to have the name as the Trollwood Performing Arts Center.
Okay, and thank you for that. I understand all of that. A concern at the time was that while we were, the community was grateful that the school was able to bail out essentially the nonprofit or to take over, there were still a lot of concerns that it would become the new Trollwood and it would no longer be something uniquely Moorhead. It would no longer be Blue Stem. And I can find notes back to our meetings where it was agreed upon that there would be no slowly taking over more and more and more of that facility as Trollwood and not the Blue Stem Regional Arts facility. So I'm very reluctant to authorize or to agree with this because I just don't like Blue Stem, that facility, not having its own identity and being identified as Trollwood. So if there's anything we can do to change that or to fit that into the lease, I don't know, but I'm not comfortable with that language being stated as Trollwood.
Yeah, Councilmember Duran, Mr. Mayor, I'd suggest that there is no rush for this one because the lease is in effect until the end of the year. If it's okay, we'll take it back, we'll look at it, we'll dissect that part and bring it back.
I would appreciate that unless, if everybody else is fine with it and I'm only being the one naysayer, I'm fine with being the naysayer. But I just think we have to be careful that we have this beautiful facility and we don't want one person or one entity referring to it as, or acting as if it's theirs and naming it and branding it but.
Is there any other further comments? Again, I'm listening from a historical perspective, so I'm being educated right now myself, but I mean, obviously, anything that we can, since we're talking about identity, that we can keep Moorhead, might be worth tabling it and seeing what, if any, contract language should be suggested, according to Councilmember Duran. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, or has a background on the history that they want to elaborate on? Councilmember Watson Curry.
I just appreciate that we have some historical record here on the table, so I'm full support of dissecting that. As you said, it's no rush, so I want to make sure that we do it correctly.
Anyone else have any thoughts, comments, questions? So do we need a motion to table this, or are we good enough with what we?
Bring it back.
Yeah, we'll just bring it back to you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Duran, for the history background on that. That moves us to agenda item number 21, Mayor and Council reports. Any reports for the good of the order, Council? Councilmember Watson Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember White's pointing to me because we had gotten an email. There is September 5th, which there's a lot of things happening. Let me find the correspondence. We have in the past written a letter, and if you want me to bring this up under new business, I can, but we in the past have written a letter of support for the Heartland Trail, and there is a bus tour on September 5th in Detroit Lakes with Minnesota House members, the Bonding Bill bus tour. And so it would be really helpful if the city of Moorhead is able to send a letter of support for the project. So I just wanted to put that on folks' radar and see if there is a support to gather that information. That's all I have to report on.
Thank you, Councilmember Watson Curry. Councilmember White.
Sure, and I'll add on, I don't, because Councilmember Watson Curry and I have been we attended the meetings, she's been going for a while, but neither of us can attend this bus tour, so that might be, if there's besides a letter, if there's anyone else on the council that can go on the bus tour, that might be great. And my other things I wanted to mention, I was glad that Commissioner Keeler was able to come here, because at our last Human Rights Commission meeting, we had an extensive talk about, the upcoming activities that are being planned for Indigenous Peoples Day, and they're meeting every 2 weeks now. There's a planning committee that's working on it, and so I thought it was great that they have thought to include all of us in that, and so hopefully there's a way that we can be involved in different ways. I also wanted to mention that we have our students back, our college students, and so it was great to see students moving into MSUM and Concordia, and students getting ready to come back at M-State, so, and if you get a chance, go on September 5th to Bridge Bash, so you can welcome our college students back to the community. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Any other council members have any reports they wish to make? Councilmember Dahlquist.
Thank you, Mayor. I did get to go to the ribbon cutting ceremony for the Lotus Center, which is right across from the library, and there was a good turnout for that, and it's a good new rehab center that's very encouraging to people if you've fallen down, to get back up and keep trying. And there was a lot of excitement and a good turnout, and it's in a really cool building that you might know.
I just might. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have any reports? I'll briefly make a report. This is, as everyone knows, I missed the August 12th meeting. My family and I were out of the area on vacation, so I still want to give a heartfelt apology for not being around on Night to Unite. I did tell my spouse that we'll plan our vacation better next year. We hadn't gone on one for a couple of years, so it's much needed. Mom and Dad are very happy to see their grandkids, so that's what came out of that. But I bounced back in when I got back on the 14th. The League of Minnesota Cities did pay us a visit at the Boulder Tap House. We had a meeting with the mayors, I believe, from Dilworth, Glendon, and Hawley, along with some city staff as well, talking about economic development in our area, and also talking also about working on more border cities related type of development as well. So I do send a special shout out to the League of Minnesota Cities for coming up here and visiting and hearing us talk about our hopes and dreams for our cities. Also, briefly, there was a meeting of the Minnesota-Clay County Joint Powers Authority regarding land acquisition projects that we have going on. And that meeting was held, I believe, last week, and we had another one this week. And also, in diversion news, we do have a new executive director on the Diversion Authority Board, Councilmember Joel Paulson. Unfortunately, this will be his last meeting tonight, but I guess fortunately, he has taken over in that position. I think he will do very well in that position, serving the interests of our region. Very sad to see him go. That was the big news. But we're also happy to have someone who's obviously qualified, well-experienced, well-educated in the backgrounds of serving the needs of a lot of people in a lot of communities. So though it is a huge loss for the city of Moorhead, just like we lost Councilmember Gertz, we are also gaining, and the region's gaining, a trusted person who knows what they're going to do about civic engagement, community engagement regarding the diversion project. So again, I'm sure we'll say our obviously not really a goodbye, but our byes later. But that's pretty much on the diversion front. And also, Councilmember Shelley Carlson will be filling in for Councilmember Paulson's role on the diversion board. Thank you for stepping up and getting immersed in this project as well. So it's greatly, again, you know, it's going to be time consuming, but you can do it and you will do it because you're awesome and you rock. Right. So there is that too. Otherwise, what I like to start doing is a lot to catch up on, but I would like to begin to recognize businesses and things that are going on in the community during this time. I'm probably a little short on that tonight because I was gone for 2 weeks, but I will in the future try to catch up on my social media game because I see that Moorhead Business Association does put out a lot of information regarding anniversaries, regarding the businesses that businesses have in our communities, but also introducing new businesses that are opening in our communities. So I do want to take some time in the future to acknowledge those groups because, again, the council is, and as well as city staff, about economic development, job creation, and also being responsive to the needs of our residents. So I won't be prepared to do that tonight, but in the future, I will do that. And if I miss anybody, please feel free to email me because I don't want to leave anybody out. There's just so much to catch up on. So that's my report, unless anyone has anything else. Hearing none, I'll pass it over to City Manager Volkers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no report other than due to Councilmember Paulson's resignation and his promotion or transfer to his new position, the executive leadership team and the city council chipped in for a gift. And so I'll have the mayor present that to you.
I don't want to break anything, so I gotta be careful. I'm not sure what's in it. So, but it is testing my engineering skills.
The top is open.
The top is open.
Yes, there you go.
I can just pull it out. There you go. So that's why I'm the attorney here, the engineer. So, on behalf of the city council, city staff, I present you with this picture of the Tri-City area.
It's really cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
And there's a card as well.
Card too. Oh. All right.
So you're aware.
Oh, if I may, Mayor.
Please.
I really appreciate that, Chris, and please tell all of the leadership team, thank you, and thank you, council. It's been an absolute joy for me to be able to serve on the city council. Something that I had thought of most of my adult life, getting involved in my community, trying to do some good, and trying to leave the city a better place than I found it. This experience has been absolutely fabulous. I'd like to just reach out to the general public and make sure people understand how rewarding public service is. It's very time consuming, but in the end, I took great joy out of this position, and I hope to think that I did make some change within the city. Unfortunately, my time is shorter than I had anticipated, but I do believe the city is in great hands with the council up here. I think you are all passionate individuals that absolutely care about our community and want to see Moorhead thrive and get better. So I thank you all for your service, and I'm really, truly going to miss you all. So I'll still be able to see you once in a while, I hope. So thank you, Moorhead, for allowing me to serve in this position. It's been fabulous. Thank you.
And again, thank you for your service, Councilmember Paulson, and again, best of luck in your new position.
Thank you.
Okay. We move to item number 23, executive session. 23A, executive closed session pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05, subdivision 3, to discuss the sale of Clay County parcel number 58.980.1701, owned by the city of Moorhead. And is there a motion to go into executive session? Motion made by Councilmember Durand, seconded by Councilmember Watson Curry. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are in executive session. Thank you, Moorhead. For those of you who want to stick around, we'll be back in a while.
I'm glad you're still going to be around.
Yes. I'm not going on a permanent vacation, so.
I know you're Norwegian.
I'll probably see you more now than I
This August 26th council meeting, City Moorhead adjourned. It is 8:13 PM. Good night, Moorhead.